Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about the types of sentences. We have four main types of sentences that you all have to find out how to use them correctly and properly in our sentences, whether while we are speaking, writing, and even to notice these sentences when we are reading. We have four types of sentences: simple sentences, complex sentences, compound sentences, and compound complex sentences. It's very essential to each of you to identify and recognize these types to make sure that you would sound like a native. So I want you please to stick around till the end. So what is a simple sentence? A simple sentence usually expresses one single thought. A simple sentence contains a main subject and a main verb, but it doesn't have to be one subject only or one verb only. It could be more than one subject and more than one verb, but it still expresses one single thought. Let's see some example sentences before we move deeper into the types of simple sentences. So we have the first sentence here: the baby cried for food. So baby is the subject, cried is the verb. Baby cried for food. So we have one single thought in here, only one single thought. Okay, so it still doesn't change any of the meaning. Another sentence: the green dish broke. So as you can see, dish is the subject, broke is the verb. So as you can see, it still expresses one single thought. And that's what we call an independent clause. So a simple sentence means one independent clause. Now let's move to the types of simple sentences. So we have here compound subject. Let's read the example sentence. Cassidy and Arturo like to study in the morning. As you can see, we have two subjects here, Cassidy and Arturo, and we have one main verb, which is like. Okay? So these are the subject and that is the verb. But as you can see, if you read the sentence again, we don't have more than one thought. So the overall context of the sentence is based that both, like both actually, these people like to study in the morning. So we don't have more than one thought. It's only one individual thought. Moving to the second type, which is compound verb simple sentences. For example, Alicia goes to the library and studies every day. So we have two verbs here, but it still expresses one single thought, because Alicia goes to the library and studies. So she goes there and studies. Okay, so we don't have two thoughts. It's still one single thought. So it's still a simple sentence. Another type, which is compound direct object. For example, the green dish hit the ground. So dish is the subject and hit is the verb. So that green dish hit the ground. So it's a very simple thought. That's a simple sentence. We don't have more than one thought. Okay? Then the last type here, compound prepositional phrase. The llama split at the man's head. So it split at the man's head. So one single thought, and that's about the llama. So the llama is the subject, and split is the verb, and that's the prepositional clause. Okay? So as you can see, it's very easy to identify these type of sentences, which is a simple sentence. So a simple sentence means one single thought. That's it. Now, what is a compound sentence? A compound sentence usually has two independent clauses joined by either a conjunction word or a conjunctive adverb. What does it mean? Basically, a compound sentence is composed of two simple sentences. Let's see an example before we move on into more details. The shoplifter had stolen clothes, so he ran once he saw the police. Let's forget about this conjunction word, okay? Let's forget about it. We have one independent clause here and one independent clause here. What is an independent clause? An independent clause is a part of the sentence that can stand alone because it can express a single thought. It has a meaning. So for example, if you read this sentence alone, the shoplifter had stolen clothes. So if you read this clause sentence alone, it still has a meaning. So that's what we call an independent clause. It doesn't need something to depend on. Even if you read the other half of the sentence, he ran once he saw the police. So you can still understand the meaning of this clause sentence, and that's what we call an independent clause. So as you can see, a compound sentence consists of two independent clauses. So these two independent clauses are joined by either a conjunction word, for example, or, so, and, yet, nor, and for, or joined by a conjunctive adverb, for example, however, in contrast, similarly, therefore, thus, hence. We have a lot of conjunctive adverbs. Okay? Now let's move to the second sentence to help more comprehend what I'm talking about. They spoke to him in Spanish, but he responded in English. So as you can see, that's an independent clause and that's an independent clause. So if you read these two clauses alone, they still have meaning. So they spoke to him in Spanish. I still understand the sentence. He responded in English. He responded in English. But these two independent clauses are joined by a conjunctive word. A conjunction word, which is but. Moving now to another sentence. Some other aspects of reforms, however, appear counterproductive. That's a conjunctive adverb. And that's an independent clause. And that's another independent clause. Okay, so we have two independent clauses joined by a conjunctive adverb. That is a compound sentence. We quite often use these compound sentences in our writing essays, or if you are writing, or for example, if you are reading a book, you would come across heaps of compound sentences because they can express two different meanings. Okay, not two different meanings actually, but we have two independent clauses that have different meanings, or they actually trying to show you how compounded the sentence is. Okay, so in this specific sentence, however, the conjunctive adverb, we can use however in the middle of the sentence, or we can even use however at the beginning of the sentence, or even at the end of the sentence. And that's how beautiful conjunctive adverbs are. For example, however, some other aspects of the reforms appear counterproductive. It still makes sense. Or some other aspects of the reforms appear counterproductive, however. So how beautiful and amazing to use conjunctive adverbs in many places in the sentence that would give more sense to the actual sentence. Moving now to the last sentence. Institute depositors could see what was happening to the value of the land. They moved quickly to remove the deposits for cash. Here we have a semicolon. That's what we call semicolon. Semicolon is considered to be, an alternative of conjunction or conjunctive adverb, as you can see. So if you read the sentence, we have two independent clauses. So that's an independent clause and that's an independent clause here. Okay, so we have as the two depositors could see what was happening to the value of the land. So that's an independent clause. And we have they moved quickly to remove their deposits for cash. That's also an independent clause. It can stand alone. Okay, it's like a single thought. So as you can see, this compound sentence or a compound sentence consists of two simple sentences. So that's a simple sentence here and that's a simple sentence here. So two simple sentences are joined together to form a compound sentence. So they're either joined by a conjunction word or a conjunction adverb or a semicolon. Okay, so that's how we use compound sentences in our writing or even when we are speaking. Jumping now into the third category of sentences, and that's what we call complex sentences. What is a complex sentence? A complex sentence consists of an independent clause plus one or two dependent clauses. So an independent clause means it has a subject and a verb. It can stand on its own. It can stand alone. It can express a single thought. However, a dependent clause means it lacks either a subject or a verb or actually both of them. Okay, I will show you what I mean next in these sentences. So, a complex sentence consists of one independent clause plus one or two dependent clauses plus either a subordinator such as, because, since, after, although, when, whereas, even though. These are subordinators, or a relative pronoun, for example, who, that, or which. So that is the meaning, and that's how we use complex sentences. Let's move into the first example sentence here. After eating at the Cheesecake Factory, Tim went to the gym to exercise. So we started the sentence by a subordinator. Okay? We don't have to start the sentence by a subordinator because we can use a subordinator at the beginning of the sentence or in the middle or maybe at the end. It's okay. Okay? But let's just focus on the clauses of this sentence. So as you can see here, if we actually separate the whole sentence into halves, so the first one, after eating at the cheese factory, after eating at the cheese factory. So we don't have, as you can see, it lacks actually a verb. We don't have a verb. Or actually we don't have, we might have a verb, but there's no subject. Okay, after eating at the cheese factory. Okay, what happened? What really happened? So it lacks a subject here. So that's a dependent clause. However, the other half of the sentence, Tim went to the gym to exercise. So Tim went to the gym to exercise. So it has a meaning. We have a subject and a verb. So that's an independent clause. Okay? So as you can see, if we read the sentence again, we have one dependent clause, one independent clause, and a subordinator. So it's definitely a complex sentence. Moving to the second sentence, opinionated women are given disadvantages in societies. If we read the sentence very well, it's definitely an independent clause. So we have the women, the subject, and we have given or are given is the verb. It has or it expresses one single thought. It has a meaning. So opinionated women are given disadvantages in societies that privilege male accomplishment. If we take the other half of the sentence, that privilege male accomplishment, would it make sense to use this? No, it doesn't have a meaning. It says that a privileged male accomplishment. What is the subject? There's no subject in this one. So it's definitely a dependent clause. So now we have one independent clause and one dependent clause, because as I told you, a dependent clause means it lacks either a subject or a verb or both of them. So try to focus on this. So we have this sentence, we have one independent clause, one dependent clause joined by a relative pronoun. That, okay? So that is a relative pronoun. So it's definitely a complex sentence. Moving now to another example. Today, New Zealand lacks crocodiles and turtles, even though all were probably part of its Gondwanan heritage. So as you can see, today New Zealand lacks crocodiles and turtles. So that's definitely an independent clause because it has a meaning. We have a subject and a verb here. So it can express one single thought. We can understand it. If we use this alone, we can still understand it. So that's an independent clause. Even though all were probably part of its Gondwanan heritage. If we took the other half of the sentence, it wouldn't make sense to say, even though all were probably part of its Gondwanan heritage. It doesn't make sense. So that's definitely a dependent clause. So we have one independent clause and one dependent clause joined by a subordinator. Okay? So that is a subordinator. Even though is a subordinator. So the other example is we use the subordinator at the beginning of the sentence. Okay? So you can use it in the middle or at the beginning. Okay? As long as it still expresses a very powerful meaning of the sentence. So even though crocodiles and turtles were probably part of its Gondwanan heritage, New Zealand lacks these species today. So even though crocodiles and turtles were probably part of its Gondwanan, okay, so that's heritage, so that's a independent clause. New Zealand lacks these species today. So if you read this sentence alone, it wouldn't make sense. So that's a dependent clause. New Zealand lacks these species today. What kind of species? We don't know. So if you take the other half of the sentence, it's actually a dependent clause. So we have one independent clause and one dependent clause, and we have a subordinator in here. So try to remember how to use complex sentences. Complex sentences are the most powerful to use and to express meaning of the majority of sentences in English. If you try or if you learn how to use these sentences in your writing, even when you are speaking, you would sound like a native. Okay? So these kinds of sentences are very necessary and very incumbent to use in English. Moving now to the last type of sentences, and that's what we call complex or compound complex sentences. These sentences are the most sophisticated types of sentences in English. If you learn how to use these types of sentences in your writing, you would score very high, specifically for IELTS candidates who struggle to get higher marks in the IELTS writing band. Why? Because as you all know, these examiners, the examiners for the IELTS test, always actually judge for what kinds of sentences you are using in the exam. You will have to actually use different types of sentences, and that is one of the most sophisticated types. So, a compound complex sentence consists of two independent clauses, and as you all know, an independent clause means it has a subject and a verb, so it expresses one single thought. It can stand alone. And at least one dependent clause. At least one dependent clause. So one dependent clause. So what is a dependent clause? Dependent means it either lacks a subject or a verb. So it can't stand alone. It wouldn't have a meaning if you use this sentence or these clauses or these dependent clauses alone. Okay, so let's see an example sentence. After the soccer players lost their game, they joined their teammates for lunch and they went to the movies. So after the soccer players lost their game, they joined their teammates for lunch and they went to the movies. So as you can see, if we separate these three clauses, you will notice that we have two independent clauses and one dependent clause. After the soccer players lost their game, that's definitely a dependent clause because it can't stand alone. Okay, so it's a dependent clause. If you read this sentence, it's incomplete. It doesn't express a complete thought. They joined their teammates for lunch. They went to the movies. Both of these clauses are independent clauses. Okay, so they can stand alone. So that's an independent clause and that's an independent clause. So as you can see, we have two independent clauses and one dependent clause, and that's definitely a compound complex sentences. Okay, moving to another example here. The man believed in the system and he knew that justice would prevail after the murderer was sent to jail. So the man believed in the system, it makes sense. So the man, it's a subject, believe is a verb. So it's definitely an independent clause. It can stand alone, it's a complete thought. And he knew that justice would prevail. So he knew that justice would prevail. So this one, so he knew, as you can see there. So that's a subject and that's a verb. So that's an independent clause too. After the murderer was sent to the jail. After the murderer was sent to the jail. So after the murderer was sent to jail. So that's a dependent clause, as you can see. So as you can see, it doesn't have a meaning. It doesn't express one complete thought. After the murderer was sent to jail, okay, what happened then? Okay, so it wouldn't make sense. So as you can see, we have two independent clauses and one dependent clause, and so that's definitely a compound complex sentences, or actually a compound complex sentence. So learn how to use this very well to improve or to sort of like show your fluency and your proficiency in English. It's time now for a quiz. As you can see on the board here, we have 5 sentences. All what you have to do is trying to identify the type of every single sentence. So please, I want you to write down in the comment section below what is the type of every single sentence. So let me remind you of the types of sentences. In this video, we've talked about 4 types of sentences: simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences. So try to rewind the video and go back and check how to use every single type. Best of luck with this quiz. That is all. Thank you so much for joining me in this very special and specific video. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and activate the bell button to help receive all the upcoming uploads. I wish you all the best and I look forward to seeing you again on my platform.